All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this reception night. My name is Alexandra Caroline Maftei, curator of the exhibition Dialogues Across Borders, Representations of Spatial, Corporeal, and Textual Bodies. This exhibit features the works of three individuals, Mademoiselle G, a French cartographer based in the EU, Paulina Austeru, a Romanian writer and detective based in Bucharest, and Alexandra Maftei, Romanian graphic designer based in Toronto, Canada, who is this exhibition's designer in residence. As the curator, I'm here today to present who these people are, by themselves and in relation to each other, and to present the dialogue between the work. And at the end, I will explain the nature of this particular exhibit a little bit more as well. And now, before I get into my first contributor, I'd like to establish the following. This exhibit is about dialogue, this exhibit is about borders, this exhibit is about bodies, and this exhibit is about representations. So I'll begin with my first contributor, Mademoiselle G. Very little is known about the individual behind the pseudonym Mademoiselle G. When she learned that I had it in mind to exhibit her work in writing, she begged me to suppress her name. If I had to describe her, I would call her a flâneuse, an observer, a philosopher, to quote Charles Baudelaire from The Painter of Modern Life. She carries originality to the point of shyness. She sees everything in a state of newness, someone whose curiosity had become a fatal, irresistible passion. She's a lover of incognitos, yet the public is her element. She's an I with an unending appetite for the non-I, a great cosmopolitan that one would call a woman of the world. By profession, Mademoiselle G is a cartographer, a researcher for the Geographic Information System of the Commission under the European Union. But by passion, she's a photographer. So, for a flâneuse with an occupation as rigid as geography, it was only natural that she embarked on such an eccentric project. Exhibited to your left is the photography series Studying Borders from the Border by Mademoiselle G. Self-published in early 2025, it documents the paysage, the landscape of the outer border of the Crimean Peninsula, south of Ukraine. The photographs were then retrospectively taxonomized into four main categories: land at the horizon, liminal horizons, bodies at borders, and liminal bodies. The story behind this project is quite interesting. She was gracious enough to provide some of her writing to include in this presentation, so to quote her as translated from French, I had arrived in the Crimean Peninsula, south of Ukraine, about to start my next assignment, when I started thinking about borders. An old friend and I spent an evening by the seaside. Looking into the dark, eternal horizon, it struck me then that this small country in the Black Sea was in a precarious situation. If not for the small bridge of land connecting it to the southern flank of Ukraine, it perhaps would not know where it was relative to the rest of the world. Surrounded by water, there is nothing distinguishable from the perspective of those inland that defines its position. After all, the mere external border does not give you any information. The only thing that would help is beyond the border, knowing what surrounds you. She continues, before my next assignment started, I set out on a trip. I took photos only from the locations at the border. In my profession, I understand the border of a nation-state as a line on a map. But being there, in the real physical world, at the boundary of land and sea, nation-state and outer world, I found that this was not a line, as it appears on a map, but a space, an evolving living space. It is beautiful, but also precarious, presenting me with very strange visualities. I found so many anomalies in my photographs, unexplainable anomalies. The horizon line fractured, spliced, repeating. The people meshing, merging, mixing into the landscape. I realized why. Borders are not border lines, but borderlands. The space where one spatial body meets another, where one nation-state meets another, meets the entity that is outside of itself. It is a space where two entities interact. In theory, that is so beautiful, so intimate. But by drawing a border, a line, a division, you disrupt this space. It becomes divisive rather than transformative. And this disruption, this is what I found in my photographs. After all, it is not the border itself that is important, but the bodies that lie outside of it, and the relationship you have to what lies outside of it. In reality, the border is nothing more than just the skin of the nation-state. Je ne sais pas si cela a déjà été remarqué, mais l'une des caractéristiques principales de la vie, c'est la discontinuité. À moins qu'une film de carte ne nous enveloppe, nous mourrons. L'homme n'existe que dans la mesure où il est séparé de son environnement. Le crâne est un casque de cosmonaute. Restez à l'intérieur ou vous périssez. La mort est un dépouillement. La mort est une communion. Se mêler au paysage peut être une chose merveilleuse, mais cela signifie la fin du tendre ego. I continue on now to my second contributor, Paulina Austeru. Paulina Austeru is a Romanian writer based in Bucharest who recently took on the occupation of detective. She insisted that rather than present about her, I read her biography in her words. So, as she says, translated from Romanian, my name is Paulina Austeru. That is not my real name. I am a detective now, on a glorified tail job. There's nothing more to say, there's everything to say. I was called one day randomly and took on the skin of a detective. I was asked to tail someone, a suspicious subject, and figure out who they were. I began drawing paths of their movements day after day. I collected things they dropped, some mir, an Orthodox crucifix, and a cork of wine. Feathers they collected and dropped again. My subjects must like birds. Anyways, I began to realize how much of themselves I was able to know based on information outside of their body. I assumed I would have to meet their actual body to talk to them, to interface with their corporeal self. But we'd been in dialogue this entire time. So then I started thinking about us. Generally speaking, we address our bodies as limited to the boundary of the skin, but this is radically limited. So much of ourselves actually exists outside of this border. How much of us is within our skin versus the things around us, the space around us, the people around us? We put ourselves so far outside of our skin, in our spaces, littered with evidence of our mannerisms and habits, in our clothes, our second skin, in our objects, in our creations, in our words, spoken, written. Especially through the technology of writing, so much of our thoughts, the ephemera in our mind, is not ours, but other people. Therefore, we, ourselves, we exist in other people, and conversely, other people exist in us. You might be wondering, why am I doing this? To remember what it feels like to wear other people's clothes. Back in the old days, 18, 20 years ago, when I had no money and friends would give me things to wear. A's old overcoat from university, for example. And the strange sense I would have of climbing into her skin. That's probably a start. And then most important of all, to remember who I am. To remember who I'm supposed to be. I do not think this is a game. On the other hand, nothing is clear. For example, who are you? And if you think you know, why do you keep lying about it? I have no answer. All I can say is this, listen to me. My name is Paulina Austeru. That is not my real name. Scopul poeziei e să ne amintească cât de greu e să rămâi o singură ființă, că casa noastră e deschisă, fără chei la uși, iar ospeți nevăzuți vin și pleacă după voie. I move on now to the final and third exhibitor in our show, Alexandra Maftei. Alexandra Maftei is a student of visual communication. She hates having to title herself, but reluctantly settles as a graphic designer with a background in visual arts. Her practice is deeply rooted in humanities, linguistics, and writing. She insisted that I read out her biography and description in her voice, like Paulina, but specifically requested that I perform that I am her, and perform her segment of the presentation. And so, hello everyone. My name is Alexandra, otherwise known as Alex or Ali. I'm the designer of this exhibition and one of its contributors. I'm interested in the very words I'm using right now, these bodies. But to explain my contribution to this exhibition, I need you all to follow me back to the very beginning. This all began with one word, umstroke, meaning an outer border or periphery of a circle. I was asked to make something of it, something of this archaic word. I was not satisfied with one meaning of the word, so thinking semantically as well as biologically, I extrapolated it. I dissected it into 3 different strata based on biological levels of organization. From organism, organ, and atom, we get space, the most expansive, corporeal body, the mediary, and language, the smallest atomic unit, which exists in everything. First, I wanted to study the spatial plane, but I am no geographer. So through Mademoiselle G, I became one. I put on her skin and traveled around Crimea. I read and studied about the semiotics of space, urbanism, geopolitics, and the history of borderlines versus borderlands. I wrote about the erotics of space, the nature of borderlines, and how their representation disrupts the transformative dialogue that should exist at the border. I wanted to investigate the true borders of the human self, what is and isn't confined to skin, but I am no specialist of investigating people. So through Paulina Austeru, I became one. I put on her skin and became an impromptu detective. To quote the writer Paul Auster, the detective is the one who looks, who listens, who moves through this morass of objects and events in search of the thought, the idea that will pull all these things together and make sense of them. I connected my embodied knowledge with that of others, psychologists, theorists, philosophers, my peers, that pass through the borders of myself. I found that more than anything, ourselves exist outside of the borders of our skin. Now myself, I'm investigating language, words, representation. You might be wondering what my contributed work is to this exhibition. Well, it's being made as we speak, or rather as I speak. I'm recording a film right now, capturing this performance, which will be represented as a video in this very space. You might be wondering why I chose to do a presentation like this. There's something about the immediacy and the performance of speech. It's an action, but especially in the context of us speech, it's a performance. The curtain calls and the presentation starts. My tongue dances in an array of intricate movements, and suddenly we're put into a situation where you are fully attentive to me, and I to you. Speaker to audience, we are in dialogue. There are many forms of language. Speech is one of them. Writing is another, which takes the form of text. You see, I'm deeply interested in text and the bodies they inhabit. Words. Did you know that text was not always words, as in separate words? Writer Gert Noords illuminates that a word, separated from other words with spaces, only appears to have been invented in Ireland in the first half of the 7th century. Before this, writing was just one continuous line of letters. By creating word space, we give words distinctions from each other. We give them a periphery, a border, and by extension, their own vessel, a body. So here's the interesting bit. Do you understand that words themselves are the same as you and me? They would not exist without their relativity toward one another. They are bodies. You know what this word means because you know all the words that it is surrounded by. Just like ourselves, and just like our nation states, and just like our egos and our national borders, they're not real, yet very real. They're both real and not real, and doesn't this sound familiar? Postmodernism is the deconstruction of self and the other and language, the representation, the meaning. It's a kind of system we invented, a network of signifiers which has a life and creates life. The language itself, the representation itself, creates reality, including hyperreality. It makes us to believe in things, to see things which is not there. Representation is not presentation of the real. It is representation. Spatial borders are not real. The borders of ourselves are not real. The very tools we make to use these constructions, language, is not real. It is all representation. Therefore, it's easy to say that they should be deconstructed, that we can't rely on them. But just like how they can distort our reality, they create our reality in the first place, and therefore, we can create our own realities with them. Borders, bodies, representation, these entities, they are not real. But by incanting them, by articulating them, by embodying them, as in causing them to become a body, they become real. Through representation, the immaterial, our thoughts, our ideas, our fascinations, different facets of ourselves can become reality. In the postmodern condition of groundlessness, fragmentation, dematerialization, deconstruction, our boundaries, our borders, our constructions, our representations are how we know where we are relative to what's around us. We can only know ourselves through others. We are eternally bound to each other for any sense of orientation. And we come to know them, self and other, through the delicate relationship, the dialogue, the attention, the care, the love, the eros of creation, incantation, communication. Regardless of it is all a construction, regardless if none of it is real to begin with. So, I hope you enjoyed the presentation of my exhibitors, Mademoiselle G, Paulina Austeru, and Alexandra Maftei. I want to talk briefly about the construction of this space, this gallery. Because typically a gallery is a space where, work is just simply presented, but as curator, I devised a slightly different method. The room to your right is the studio of Alexandra Maftei. As designer in residence, this project continues through her, throughout the duration of this exhibit. Because you see, borders, articulations, representations are in a constant state of dialogue and therefore not finite. They are malleable rather than fixed, transient rather than divine. So what about the space of the gallery? The gallery is something that we treat as permanent, as fixed, as static. But what if it was ever changing, transient, in a state of flux rather than permanence, malleable rather than immutable? What dialogues emerge between studio and gallery, making and presenting, real and representation? This is for Alexandra to find out. In this way, the gallery is not only a space for representations, but a representation itself, an entity, a body, a space to tinker with, not just tinker in. So throughout the next 2 weeks, this space will evolve, it'll change, it'll grow. So on the 2nd of June, I invite you all back, for some sort of closing reception. Probably not anything too crazy, but, for those who are curious to see, what shifted or changed throughout this space. So with that, I thank you for coming to this presentation and to see these sort of assemblages of this project. I hope that you enjoyed this dialogue between my contributors, between me and you. Regardless of their fidelity, it's thanks to representation, constructions, language, that allowed for us to share these moments of understanding. It's thanks to the construction of language that we can share in this dialogue. It is the construction which allows us to create other constructions. The construction which allows us to create other constructions. The construction which allows us to create other constructions. And the construction which allows us to create other constructions.